Welcome back, everybody. It's the Fantasy Football Strategist here. And today we're going to go round by round through the first 6 rounds of startups and discuss who we think the potential worst pick in each round is. Now, for a lot of these, there are multiple players that you could potentially choose. I have my reasons for each player, and I'm going to give you one player in each of the first 6 rounds that I just personally do not like at their price. Now, does this mean I just don't like the player? No, there's just reasons why where they're being selected, I would just be a little bit lower on them than the current ADP. And so taking a look at round one, there are a couple players that I think you could choose here. I'm personally going with Jalen Hurts as the worst value. Now, Joe Burrow goes at pick 5 overall. Now, he's had multiple season-ending injuries, but when he does play, he is elite. Um, you could also choose him, like I said. Brock Bowers is another player that I considered here just because, you could get somebody like Trey McBride around later, for instance, and there is a big opportunity for them to bring in significant target competition, especially if they were to go with, say, somebody like Ted McMillan, right? So I don't know that he will necessarily hold the same value going into next year. Other players could potentially be Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs, just because, the shelf life is shorter for these guys. But for this, I chose Jalen Hurts. And so a couple of reasons. One thing to mention is they obviously have Saquon Barkley, who does take away from some of the potential rushing upside of Jalen Hurts. Now, Jalen Hurts obviously has plenty of rushing upside with his tush-push touchdowns, right? The brotherly shove. There is, talk about potentially banning the play, so that is definitely something to consider here. If they were to ban that play, I really think the upside of Jalen Hurts is significantly reduced, which would only help Saquon Barkley, right? But here's the biggest reason. While somebody like, say, Joe Burrow has missed seasons with injury, right? And that is devastating for sure. With Jalen Hurts, right? In 3 of the past 4 years, he has missed time during the fantasy playoffs. 3 of the past 4 seasons. So this year, he was hurt midway through week 16. So he missed week 16 for the most part, right? And week 17. And so in week 17, obviously, if you were able to, win in week 16, you didn't start him, right? So hopefully you had somebody else to put in there if you were able to advance to the finals. But in week 16, he potentially lost you your fantasy week, right? Then we go back to 2022. In 2022, he did not play in week 16 or 17. 2 games of the fantasy playoffs, right? Then we go back to 2021. He did play the entirety of weeks 15 and 16, but in week 17, he did not. Now, he still had, 16 points in a 4-point passing touchdown league, which definitely isn't terrible, right? Because he happened to have those rushing touchdowns. But that's what I'm talking about. In 3 of the past 4 seasons, he has missed time during the fantasy playoffs when you need him the most. So that on top of the potential for him to have his rushing upside significantly reduced if the tush push / brotherly shove is banned from the NFL, I think there is significant risk here. And I just think that you could potentially be better off selecting some of these other players in the first round. Taking a look here at the second round, there are a couple players that I think you could consider here. I went with Nico Collins. Other players that I think you could consider are Puka Nacua. So he has an injury scare just about every single game. He's missed significant time in college and in the NFL with injuries already. He said that he, plans to retire at 30. I wish him the best, but I'm not sure that he makes it to 30, to be honest with you, with his injury history. It is extensive. Other players, potentially, you could go with definitely Saquon Barkley, in my opinion. Yes, he's probably going to be elite for us, potentially 1 to 2 more years, but what is the shelf life like with him? He's had a ton of work. He's dealt with injuries in the past, right? And while it is great for the short term, I personally just would not, draft a 28-year-old running back within the first 2 rounds of my startup. I would just much rather have a long-lasting player like another receiver, quarterback, or potentially even if you were going to go running back, a running back with, a longer projected shelf life than Saquon Barkley. But like I said, I went with Nico Collins here. And so why do I think Nico Collins is potentially a bad value at his current ADP? Well, if you take a look at his games played in each season, you'll notice that he hasn't played a complete season one single time. He played 14 games in 2021, 10 games in 2022, 15 in 2023, and 12 in 2024. There are various injuries suffered here, as you can see below, courtesy of Draft Sharks. You'll see that he has an 82.1% chance of injury, which is very high risk according to them. Now, there's a lot that goes into how they calculate this, right? But that doesn't sound unreasonable to me, right? I mean, if you look, he hasn't, it's like, James Conner, where, this last season, he finally made it through the entirety of the fantasy season. He did get hurt and missed the last week of the season, but it's just how many times does somebody have to miss an extensive amount of time for it to just bog down their ADP, right? Now, as far as his talent is concerned, he's incredibly talented. He's an elite wide receiver one when he's healthy and when he plays, has, one of the biggest upsides of any wide receiver. There are players like, Jamar Chase, for instance, that have that 50-point upside, right? But that is just so worrying. And then besides that, there are players such as Drake London, Marvin Harrison, Ladd McConkey, players that I personally would rather have than Nico Collins. Now, I know that some people are going to say Marvin Harrison. I think he's really talented. His rookie season was comparable to that of CeeDee Lamb. I think he is going to be a low end to mid wide receiver one eventually at some point in his career. Now, that may not happen this season for sure, but players like Drake London, Marvin Harrison, they just don't really have the injury concerns. And then with Ladd McConkey, he's kind of like Puka where he has an injury scare here and there, especially with his shoulder, but he didn't miss any time. And I just would prefer to draft players especially if they're going to be in the top 2 rounds that aren't as likely to miss extensive periods of time, which could result in a drastic lowering of their value. Now, taking a look at round 3, there are once again a couple players that I think you could consider here. You may not personally believe in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s ability to produce for us in fantasy. I think people are drastically overreacting. I think he, once again, had a comparable rookie season to that of CeeDee Lamb from back in 2020. I'm not worried at all. I think he's incredibly talented. He is already one of the best man-beating wide receivers in the NFL. Understand that, right? But, there are players like, for instance, AJ Brown. And, I asked a question to the community because, I wasn't aware that the community in general was so down on AJ Brown. But you guys provided, me with a lot of things to consider here, right? The general target volume, it did go down this past season. They were rushing the ball extensively with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts. Now, one thing is he was still incredibly productive with the somewhat limited volume from week to week. For instance, he had 6 out of 13 games played as a wide receiver one. And so he was still producing, but he was having to be incredibly efficient. So I definitely think that's something to consider here. Somebody like Breece Hall, they did mention, Aaron Glenn mentioned that they potentially want to have a 3-man committee. I don't think that they're going to be taking away touches from Breece Hall like that because Breece Hall, I think, is by far and away their most talented runner. And then, and a receiver as well. Then you have Rashee Rice. Is he the same coming back from injury? We really don't know that. I wouldn't bet against him for that reason particularly, but there's also the chance of his looming suspension happening. So, with that and the injury, there is the opportunity that if he were to step away from football involuntarily for an extended period of time, that there is some risk, right? We've seen players like Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk was dominant, but then, he held out. He had a slow start to the season, then tore his ACL, right? There's definitely risk. And then, somebody like Kyler Murray, I just don't think that Kyler Murray it's not even his fault. He's just not tall enough, in my opinion, right? So he can't really use the middle of the field. He has to take it outside the pocket, scramble. He's, been hitting up McBride for those short dump offs, but he doesn't really get through his progressions because he has to get out of the pocket and he can't really see, right? But I went with Jordan Love, who is going far above Kyler Murray. And I'm going to get into some reasons why I just am not high on Jordan Love where he's going. And so with Jordan Love, he was one of my biggest sell-high candidates after his 2023 season, where he finished as the QB5 overall. Going back to what I was saying, the rushing upside is fine. It's not terrible, right? It's comparable to that, in my opinion, of somebody like Trevor Lawrence, right? But it's just, with players like Jaden Daniels coming in, the rushing upside isn't close. Even Caleb Williams, while he didn't happen to get any rushing touchdowns, he had one taken away by penalty. He still had over 400, almost 500 rushing yards. players like Jordan Love just can't compete. And that is a floor that he just does not possess compared to players like that. And so once again, he dealt with injury as well. So it isn't entirely fair because he wasn't healthy. But taking a look at the pace of play, the Packers were 29th. So less plays, less opportunities, right? Game script, they were plus 2.87, which was sixth best in the NFL. So guess what happens when you are leading games? You don't really need to pass as much, right? So he's on a good team, which will therefore lower his total pass attempts from week to week. Granted, it is situational. There can be games where they're trailing, right? But in general, as you can see, they had the sixth best positive game script. Then you go to his accuracy rating versus man. It was 29th in the NFL. His accuracy rating versus zone was 26th. His clean pocket accuracy rating was 30th. I mean, I don't know what to tell you when your clean pocket accuracy grade is that low. His deep ball catchable pass rate was 15th. That's fine. His pressured catchable pass rate was 35th. That's right. There are only 32 starting quarterbacks. And then his catchable pass rate overall was 25th. And so a lot of these are stats that are, up to him. It's not, the completion percentage where, if a receiver drops it, it hurts him. This is purely his accuracy. I just don't think he's that great of a real life quarterback. And so while he does have some long-term stability due to his contract, most likely, right? We've seen that, after sitting out a couple of years and being able to learn behind Aaron Rodgers, he came in at a very poor first half of the 2023 season, and then a stretch of, being honest, elite quarterback play at the back half of 2023. But then he just did not look like the same guy. And so essentially in 3/4 of the time he's been a starter, he's just not looked that great. So is he the elite player that we saw in the second half of 2023? Is he more like the first half of 23 and the entirety of 2024? That is up for you to decide, and you may disagree with me. I just don't think he's that great. And then, I would just, with drafting a quarterback, right? Obviously, he does have plenty of value because he has the contract, and a starting quarterback is incredibly valuable, especially if you're in a 12-team league. I would prefer to draft quarterbacks that I think are just, really good real-life quarterbacks because that just improves the long-term stability and just makes it easier to not get screwed by somebody, not performing well and then not being a starting quarterback anymore. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Made Shaq, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a Patreon member, the link's going to be below in the comment section. There we're going to have weekly live streams where we go over, fantasy news, potential buy low candidates, sell high candidates, depending on the news. We're going to give you specific league-oriented roster construction with trade advice based on your specific league settings there. We're going to give you access to early videos. We're going to give you the ability to suggest videos as well. I made a private video for someone on Isaac Rendo, some of the pluses, minuses to his game, things to like, and specific price points to sell or buy for. You're also going to find that we are working on a model with predictive capability for running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, and wide receivers based on a variety of specific metrics, minimums and maximums to be in an acceptable range for us in fantasy that will be predictive and lead us to being able to be more successful, we think, than the average person in determining which prospects based on these thresholds are likely to hit or unlikely to hit. And we're also going to be updating that each and every single year with the new prospects so that we can continuously have the best model possible. So once again, if you'd like to become a member, the link's going to be below in the comment section. Thanks. And now, before I get into round 4, the player that I think is the worst value, I wanted to mention, how I was saying that in round 3, I think Jordan Love is the worst value? Well, that's because you can get players like Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield. I personally would rather have Trevor Lawrence. With Jordan Love, right? He's had his very good offensive-minded head coach, right? They've had a bunch of wide receiver twos. There are teams with worse situations than, a bunch of solid wide receiver twos, right? He's had his tight ends. He's had a decent running game with Josh Jacobs, especially this season. And he just didn't perform that well. Whereas, players like Brock Purdy, yes, I don't think he's the most elite quarterback. He's almost certainly going to get that long-term extension. And he's in San Francisco with an offensive-minded head coach. Incredible weapons all around him. I think you are going to get better value from Brock Purdy. I think that offense is going to be electric. And I think he has the opportunity for more passing volume because I think the defense for the 49ers is going to be worse than that of the Packers. We saw a departure of some of their defensive line. Then you have, Baker Mayfield. Yes, he's a little bit older, but he has been balling the last 2 seasons. I do think he's a sell high candidate in that I don't think he's going to repeat as the quarterback 4 overall, but the situation for him is essentially the same. He did lose Liam Cohen, which isn't potentially good for him, but I think they're going to run the same system and scheme. But then you have Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has had stretches of great play and stretches of horrible play, right? But he's never had the offensive-minded head coach that Jordan Love has had. And now he's getting Baker Mayfield's prior offensive coordinator to be his head coach for the long term. I think that Trevor Lawrence is one of the best buy low candidates that there is. He's finally going to have a wide receiver 1 and an offensive mind that can help him get there, right? But this is the worst values, not the best values. We have the worst values, in my opinion. I personally went with Jonathan Taylor. I think you could go with players like Kyron Williams, for instance. Kyron Williams doesn't have any long-term security as of now. There are definitely talks about him getting a long-term contract extension with the Rams. They do like him. Who knows if that happens, though? As of this moment, we don't know. So you could potentially be drafting a running back that's not even guaranteed to be a starter. And then, there's players like Michael Penix who just really have no rushing upside at all, in my opinion. It's not that he's theoretically incapable of running. He just never really does. So I really don't think he has that much rushing upside. But the player I went with here was Jonathan Taylor of the Colts. And so getting into why I think Jonathan Taylor is one of the worst values, and especially the worst value in round 4. So in his rookie season, he started out really slow, but then went and caught fire at the end. And then in his second season, he was dominant, by far the RB1, right? But then he missed time, and he only played 11 games in his third year. Then he had the contract issue as well as injuries and only played in 10 games in his fourth year. And then this year, while he did end up finishing as a low-end RB1, the 12th overall running back, he only played in 14 games. That's right. He missed 3 games due to injury. So that means in each of the past 3 seasons, he has missed multiple games with injury. He's only getting older. He's had a ton of volume on the ground going back to his collegiate days at Wisconsin as well. But then another couple of reasons, right? Yards created per touch, his 2.74 this past season were good for 53rd among running backs. That is his ability to gain extra yardage that is not blocked for him. 53rd. His 31 targets were 38th. You have somebody like Anthony Richardson. What is a rushing quarterback in general much less likely to do? Hit the flats, right? They're going to look for the ball downfield or they're going to take off themselves more often than not. And that is the case with air edge. So then you get to your true yards per carry. That takes away the long runs to assess how efficient you are in general rushing the football. So his 4.3 true yards per carry were good for 24th. That's really not very good. His yards per touch of 4.9 were good for 24th as well. And then his juke rate, his ability to force missed tackles of 16.8% was 43rd among running backs. I think he's declined as a player. I think that while he is capable, yes, of those big boom games, that I think he's a really good sell-high candidate. He's only getting older. He's missed games in each of the past 3 seasons. And especially with this influx of rookie running back talent that could, receive good first or second round draft capital, I think that his rankings in drafts is going to plummet significantly this season. Now, going into round 5, I chose Christian McCaffrey as the worst value. There are a couple potential candidates here. You have James Cook going at the 501. He's due for some negative touchdown regression. He had a ton of touchdowns. I think he's a talented player, but he's also not guaranteed to be there for the long term. He wants to be, I think, the highest paid running back. I don't think he deserves to be, and I don't think he's going to end up being the highest paid running back. There's the chance that he does hold out. And once again, touchdowns are not sticky, so he's probably due for some negative touchdown regression. Then you have somebody like J.J. McCarthy. He was having troubles in camp, which it's understandable for a rookie, right? Most rookie quarterbacks are not Jaden Daniels, right? So first of all, he was having issues in camp with some of his accuracy and decision-making. He had some boom plays and some interceptions in the preseason, but then he tore his meniscus and missed the entirety of his rookie season, right? So then he's coming back here. We don't know that he's going to be healthy. You can't ever guarantee that anyone's healthy, but when they have injuries, that is something to note. And we don't know, honestly, if he's good. I know some people like to say that you can just drop any quarterback in this system and they are going to be great. That is not true. Do I have any reason to think that he won't be great? No, but we don't know that he's good yet. Then somebody like Chase Brown, he was not very efficient. They didn't want to make him the lead back. He was just the lead back due to Zach Moss being put on IR, and they didn't trade for a significantly talented running back. And in terms of his production, he was not efficient on the ground. He had a couple big boom games where he received a bunch of volume, and then through the air, his catch rate wasn't particularly great, and his yards per reception weren't great either. So he really wasn't doing that much. He just caught a lot of passes and did score some touchdowns. And then you have somebody like Chris Olave. I think, with Derek Carr potentially not playing this year, that he has a much less likelihood of being in the hospital at some point this year due to another concussion. But concussions have been a big issue for him. He's a talented player, just has not been healthy. But I by far and away think that Christian McCaffrey is the worst value in round 5. And so why do I think Christian McCaffrey is the worst value in the 5th round? Well, if you take a look at his historical production for us, in 2019, he was the RB1. That was an amazing season. He had over 2,000 total yards and 19 touchdowns. Incredible work. But then in 2020, he only played 3 games, missed the rest due to injury. In 2021, played 7, missed the rest due to injury. In 2022 and 23, he was the RB2 in 1. That's awesome. But then in 2024, he only played in 4 games. He's getting older. He's 28.8 years old, so he is almost 29 years old. With a 28.2 BMI, which is well below the 30.0 threshold, to be receiving the bell cow usage that he has throughout the entirety of his career. Listen, he's an incredibly talented player. I just think it's a terrible bet for you to think that you're going to get what you've been seeing from him throughout some of his career, at age 29, 30 and beyond. And, with a 5th round startup pick, I'm not trying to draft a player that maybe has 1 to 2 years at best of production, honestly. So I wanted to take a look, at the age cliff of when running backs typically don't have a peak production season. And so according to the study that I looked at, they considered a peak production season a game in which a season rather, in which a running back had at least 15 full PPR points per game and played at least 7 games. Well, as you can see on the bottom left, age 21 running backs typically don't have one of these seasons, but you'll see it ramps up from ages 22 through 25 before dipping a little bit in terms of 26-year-old running backs, significant dip in 27-year-old running backs. There is a little bit of a resurgence with 28-year-old running backs, but it is rather low compared to age 22 through 26 running backs. But then you'll see 29, 30, and 31. You're hard-pressed to find one of these elite production seasons. And McCaffrey is going to be 29. He's technically 28 right now, but he will be 29. In my opinion, you are making a bad bet. And now some people are going to take this risk, and then if he does hit, they'll say, oh, see, I told you. That is bad process, right? Typically, you're going to get better results by following the correct process. And if you find an outlier, that's great for you. But understand that that's typically not a good idea, because learning from history, or rather not learning from history, is the best way to repeat mistakes. And finally, taking a look at round 6, there are a couple players I think you could consider here. I went with Tua Tagovailoa. I'll explain why in a minute. Somebody you could consider a bad value pick, potentially Derrick Henry. He was incredible for us. He isn't showing any signs really of slowing down, but being 31 years old, there is a definite possibility he breaks down at any given moment. So you're definitely taking a risk taking a running back that old. TJ Hawkinson didn't quite look as good as he did pre-ACL injury. I think he's going to be fine, but maybe he doesn't return to the heights that we saw pre-injury. Terry McLaurin's getting older as well. Jalen Waddle hasn't really produced for us in a couple seasons due to injuries, right? But I went with Tua Tagovailoa here. And you'll probably have noticed a consistent theme. A lot of these things that I worry about are injuries. You can't predict injuries, but at some point you have to understand that some people are generally going to be more likely to get injured than others. Remember that Nico Collins has missed time in every single season. Somebody like James Conner, until this past year, which he still missed week 18, had missed time every single season for, I think, 8 years in a row. Here we have Tua, right? He's only played 1 full season throughout his entire career. He played in only 10 games as a rookie, 13 games in his second season, 13 in his third, did play 17 this past year. then only played in 11 in 2024. And so you'll notice a theme here. He misses time extensively, right? Now, Draft Sharks has his chance to miss games due to injury at a 49.1%, a medium risk. I don't know how it's that low of a calculation, but that's still a significant risk. But besides the fact that he's missed games with injury every single year except for 2023, take a look at the right side of his stat line, right? 128 yards are the most he's ever had in an NFL season. Now, he did happen to have 3 touchdowns that year, but you'll notice that he typically doesn't even have 100 rushing yards in his season. And so that just lowers your floor and reduces your ceiling at the same time. You'll notice that, yes, he does have a high-end QB2 finish and a low-end QB1 finish, but he's also finished as the 31st, 26th, and 22nd overall quarterbacks in 3 of 5 years. I personally don't know how long he's going to play. And I know he's a warrior and he's a very tough dude and he does not have any quit in him. But at some point, who knows if he's actually going to be able to play at an effective level if the cognitive ability just isn't there anymore. There is a very real chance with this. And that is part of why I worry for somebody like Jalen Waddle, who I almost considered here. And so to review, the players that I think are the worst values in startups for us in 2025. In the first round, I chose Jalen Hurts. Remember, in 3 of the past 4 years, he has missed time during the fantasy playoffs, the time in which you need him the most. Somebody like Nico Collins has never, in his 4 NFL years, played a full season. He has missed time every single year due to injury. Jordan Love. Remember that his accuracy grades from this past season were terrible, some of them worse than the 32nd best quarterback in the NFL. He missed time due to injury and saw a significant drop-off in his rushing production, which I do think was partially due to the injury. I just don't think he's the best real-life quarterback, so I think there's some risk despite his contract extension that he signed. Somebody like Jonathan Taylor, after a dominant first 2 years, especially his second season in the NFL, has missed time in each of the past 3 years. He did manage to finish as the running back 12 overall this past season due to one massive game. I think he's a sell-high candidate, and I think that there's the potential, especially with the incoming youth at running back, that he's just going to be vaulted down draft boards in terms of the positional ranking of running backs. Then you have Christian McCaffrey. Remember that in general, age 28 is the last year when you generally have peak production seasons from running backs. I think he's a talented player, but he's missed time in 3 of the past 5 seasons. He has missed multiple games due to injury, including only having played 7 games in the most of those 3 seasons. He's going to be 29 this year. It's generally a bad bet historically to bet on him having one of those types of seasons. And you're having to draft this guy in the 5th round. You could be getting somebody that's young and could be a cornerstone asset for your team for years to come. I personally will not be drafting a 29-year-old running back, no matter how talented he is. Then you have Tua Tagovailoa. He's played 1 full season. He has missed at least 1 game, and multiple games actually, and every other season that he started since 2020. The concussions are a real issue. He is a very tough human being. At some point, though, you have to worry about his cognitive ability declining potentially. So those are some reasons why I think that these 6 guys are the worst values in their own rounds in startups in 2025. But what do you think? Do you think that I'm a little bit too low on some of these guys? Do you think there are some of these other guys that could potentially be discussed as the worst value within their own round? If you think differently, let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, feel free to check out my Patreon. Feel free to follow me on X. I'm going to leave those links in the description and in the comment section. And feel free to like and subscribe because it's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you and have a good day.